Hello, constituents. I'm really excited to have an old friend of mine on the show today, and he is the minority chair of the Republican caucus at the Oakland County Commission. I used to serve on the Oakland County Commission with Mike Spisz, and a lot has changed since I was on the commission. But I want to get into that with Mike and ask him, some of the things that have happened. There's a number of scandals that have broken that I don't remember anything like that happening in all the years I was on the commission or even before. So with that, welcome, Mike. Glad to have you on the show. And tell me a little bit about what's been happening on the county commission.
Well, over the last, I'd say probably 5 to 6 years, you could really see things really going downhill quickly. The amount of money being spent by the board and or the administration itself, the number of issues that have come up over that same period of time, issues that you would never saw under the Brooks-Patterson administration. It just amazes me when you bring them up. It's almost like 1 or 2 or 3 issues a year, from something as simple as a contract negotiation, something that you would think my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would be leading the curve on, but then you have a room full of people complaining about the contract negotiations going on, about not taking care of their employees, about moving departments under one department to the next department and having people re-interview for positions they already have. Some of the things that, from my recollection under Brooks, and you probably recollect some of it the same way, it was never anything like this. And the fiscal responsibility, 1,000 new employees have been hired into the county. And the biggest thing is, now we're looking to shake up the entire county complex by moving into Pontiac.
What does that mean fiscally and otherwise?
Well, the project itself is roughly $350 to $375 million just for the project.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. And they're going to move about 700 people into the city of Pontiac. So if you calculate that, it's about $500,000 a head just to move them in the city of Pontiac. The claim is that some of the buildings are dilapidated, run down, and the cost to renovate them is a lot higher. But if you go in and ask for a business case, you can't get one.
I've seen that playbook before, telling you it's going to be a cost savings. We can't afford to stay here. It's going to be renovated. Try to get the numbers, and you can't find them. Right now, you're finding still, ever since COVID, there's been a huge vacancy issue with commercial properties. So we should be able to cut phenomenal deals, make great deals in terms of whether renovating or getting a new place. But that sounds like an extraordinary amount of money that we're paying for this transition to Pontiac.
Yeah, it is an extraordinary amount of money. And to start off, they bought 2 buildings, actually 2 buildings and a couple lots of material, or a couple lots in downtown Pontiac for $19.1 million.
Wow.
Which many of us asked for what's fair market value, right? And of course, they did a study, and of course, the company that came back said it was worth $19.1 million, right? And you're like, well, hold on. Let's look at who did the study. Why was the study done? As many of us have ever dealt with the developers, they're out there also protecting their own property value. So they're never going to come in and say it's only worth X amount of dollars.
Right.
So they paid the 19.1, even though some of us said, let's go in at 10. Let's go low and see if the owner will accept it. And they bought it 4 years prior to that for 6.
Wow. In that period of time when commercial property values have imploded, it goes from 6 to 19.1.
That's correct. So that started off the whole project. It's like, all right, we're not off on a good foot. Then they came, it's going to be $100 million. Then it's $200 million. Now it's up to $350 million. And part of the play was, okay, we're going to get private developers to pay for some of this. And they're not having the luck getting a lot of those people to come to the plate because they believe the county has the big pockets and the county's bonding it all out. So why would we pay to do it? We might help and assist you, but they're in a business to make money too.
Isn't that the way you do it? You go out and you anticipate that private companies are going to pitch in. You don't ask them. You don't get a commitment. You don't get anything in writing. You just say, well, we think that that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then the backstop is the taxpayer. Isn't that the way it's supposed to be done in government?
I would hope not. I would like to have a good business plan put together, just like anybody out there in the business market would want. If a private company went out and said, hey, I want to buy this property, or I want to develop this, or I want to expand, or I have this old building, let's find me a new building, they would do their due diligence and do a deep dive and quotes and multiple quotes to get things done.
And did you ever track how much came through on one-time dollars from the feds? It seemed like it was just endless millions that you get one time to do things like infrastructure like this, that I look around, the roads are still very, very horrendous in Oakland County. I was driving on a road the other day. It was so full of potholes, I was barely able to get from one side to the other. Ballpark what came in that?
During COVID time, $244 million.
244.
Right, and it was a lot of money, right? And I'll be honest, in some cases it was hard to find good projects to spend that money on, right?
Could you use it on roads or infrastructure?
We did some infrastructure, like we did some lead pipelines, we did some other sewer lines, we did put $10 million into the project to connect the sewer line from Genesee County into the upper north, like Holly, Brandon Townships, Groveland, because they didn't have a connection, and they have septic fields failing in the north, all those things. So we were able to put $10 million as seed money for that project. That project's still going to be another probably $100 million before it's done.
Wow.
But it's still, to really develop that area and for businesses and things to come in, you had to have something else in there. So we put $10 million into it, which is a good project. And for the most part, out of the 244, I would say the county did a relatively good job and allocated out into different areas. But they did also pad their fund balance a little bit, because anything based on the law, anything you paid for in a certain period of time, you were allowed to allocate that back into your fund balance, which the county did, like $25 million, something like that.
Could any of that have been used for this current purchase of the Pontiac buildings?
They did use a little bit, I believe it was $10 million for the original purchase of it. And thanks to the state of Michigan, they also gave a grant of $50 million.
I did see that. I voted against that, by the way.
Thank you for this project. So there were some other outside monies that came in, but it's still, you're still going out to the people for $300 million.
So from when I was there, I remember just how Brooks and the commission was so focused on making sure that we were not ever going to get caught short on the funding. So we would have a 2-year meeting of the finance committee, and then they would have a quarterly meeting. We had first the 2-year revolving budget, and went to a 5-year revolving budget. It hadn't been done anywhere else. So we were like, by the rating agencies over and over, they said Oakland County was one of, or the best run county in the nation because of the fiscal responsibility. And it just sounds like there's a lot has changed from those days.
Well, the county still has the AAA bond rating. They still do a 5-year balanced budget. They still do all that. And you understand this clearly, with all the property rates going up in Oakland County, so does their tax income. So they're still bringing in money, even though they've added all these additional resources. They've added these different additional departments, to do things. They're still, I don't think there's a year we've been in the red yet. The county's making more than enough money. And I'm going to switch gears slightly on you. One of the examples where they have kind of, I'm going to say penalized the communities is sheriff contracts. They went in for a huge increase on sheriff contracts. 35%.
Wow.
Because they wanted to calculate that different. They said they were losing money. So I want to make sure everybody's paying their fair share. And they dropped it on all these municipalities at the 12th hour. So some of them couldn't go out and get new millages because it was too late. So they had to wait a year. So they had to cover that cost. My argument at the point was, why do you need to do it now? Wait a year. If it's really that important, let's have a discussion. Wait a year. Let's do this. Let the municipalities take care of their business and raise their millages if they decide to do that. No, but they had to push it through and push it through and push it through. And I'm like, we have, as a county, have yet to be in the red.
Wow.
Right? And they did the same thing on the equalization contract, except that one went up over 100% for each community.
Wow.
And I think, don't quote me on these numbers, I believe there was 32 prior to the raise. They lost 17 of those. So they don't have that workload coming into the county anymore, right, for equalization. And one of the reasons Brooks tried to bring it all in and, quote, discounted it to a degree, was to make sure they had consistency in the numbers for all of our equalization and our property taxes. So now everybody's going independent. I would not be surprised over the next couple of years if you start to see a variation in the data we're getting from all these independent agencies.
And the biggest thing I hear, other than just general affordability and healthcare affordability, is property tax. And if we have all these increases in property, if it were managed properly, I'm sure we could decrease property tax. And that's not going to happen. And what will happen in the next downturn in the economy is all these departments are going to have to get slashed. There's going to have to be massive cutting at the county. Instead of saying, well, we've got all this additional dollars come in, let's be very, very conservative with the money. And it doesn't sound like that's happening at all.
They're not being very conservative with the money, but I think the bigger issue is they keep adding additional taxation. You go into the Parks and Rec millage, and I'm a full supporter of Parks and Rec, right? They went up to 0.65 mils. Brought in additional $66 million into the county parks area. Okay. What they're doing is they're now supporting all the local municipality parks because they can't afford them. The county parks is giving out grants, et cetera. And the argument is, okay, they're paying for it, which they are because they raise their county tax millages. So it's now kind of taking the money from the county, pushing it into some municipalities so that they can manage those properties. And then you had the transit millage that came on top of it, 0.95 mils. Right, into all the communities in the north were never receiving that kind of service. Has it gotten better over the last couple of years? Yes. Ridership is up, true. But do they get their value for the 0.95 mils they're paying for that service.
No,
Most likely not.
No, that what they were paying before, a lot of them had their own smart system or their own local system, and no, they're not
There's
getting
anywhere
that back.
from what I recall, anywhere from 0.1 to 0.25 mils back then. Now they're
Exactly.
paying 0.95.
Yes, yeah, gigantic increase.
So, I mean, go back to your point about the taxation and the property tax. That's the biggest area we see people complain, which I'm sure you see at state, right?
Oh, yes.
So, but how can you continue to add these additional taxes on there when people are already complaining about property taxes? And if you think of the way it's calculated, right, your property values are going up, so everybody's taxes are going up at the same time. Yeah, you have Prop A, but that's only keeping it limited to a certain point. Everything is still going up every year. And you
Oh,
add
yeah.
these other millages on there. It's like,
Yeah,
how do you
they're
adjust
dri-
that? You
they're
gotta-
driving
it's a
people
fine,
out of their homes.
It's a fine balance, yeah.
And if the economy takes any kind of a downturn, we are going to have, foreclosures like we've never seen, probably as bad or worse than 07, 08. It's just such a terrible thing to think you have a home and you can't stay there because of the taxes. But there's other issues. I know there's been some things in the paper I want you to address about some of your colleagues, and really, to me, some very scurrilous stuff that's been going on.
Like Zaid Logic is the IT contract, because we're moving Clemis outside, right? Clemis is going to be an authority versus being run by the county right now. And that all logically made sense because of the cash and the cost to upgrade all the equipment there was excessive. So we all agreed to put a little bit of seed money in there again. Let's make it an authority and move it out. But what happened is there were some people in our IT department that decided to quote on the IT contract for that. And guess what? They got it. Until a whistleblower came out and blew up all the works, and then the administration started to backpedal. So they did an investigation, and they actually hired a third party, which I gave them credit for instead of doing it themselves. Hired a third party law firm, did an investigation. They just gave us a report, right? Said state laws were violated in what was done. There were some people that were reprimanded, yes, which is good. But when you go and ask what those state laws that were violated, they won't share that data with you. I can't even see it, right? So I filed a police report because there was criminal activities. I said, I'd like somebody to actually investigate this. If there was criminal activities, what were they, right? And should some people be held liable for their actions? Yes. So I did the police report with the county sheriff's department. County sheriff's department, of course, doesn't want to investigate their own county, right? So they looked at other places, went to the state police, handed off the data to the state police. State police said, yes, we'll take it. They did a little investigation, I think, because they never called me, the guy that wrote the police report or asked the police report to be written, never called me, closed the case, never called me once and said it was closed. I found out through third parties that they closed the case. So from the state, I'm like, how do you, we have credible law firm that says the state law was violated. Wouldn't you at least do a little bit more investigation to see, okay, is it worth going and taking this to the next level and at least filing paperwork with the AG's office? Didn't even get that far.
Were you or are you able to take it direct to the AG?
Tried that too. Didn't go anywhere.
Well, what happened there?
So the AG won't touch it unless you have an investigation.
Did you take it to the prosecutor in Oakland County?
We did not formally take it. Did I have conversations? Yes. But they felt since it was their county also, they had to go and would refer it somewhere else.
Who did they say they'd refer to?
AG's office.
So you saw the report
I have
that
never seen a full report from
the law firm.
the law firm. They will not share that data. They say
Since
attorney-client
it's
privilege.
public dollars, wouldn't it be foiable?
It's not foiable.
How do you spend?
Attorney-client privilege. It's not foible information, is what we're being told. And since they had people that they interviewed based on not being held accountable for their interview, they felt that they can't get that information out at all.
Well, from state level, I'll see what I can do too.
I appreciate
do
that.
a little digging on that one. Well, that's interesting. And what else do we have? I know there's some more scandals going on.
Yeah, there's the current one, which you probably saw on Channel 7 recently, relative to one of the Oakland County deputy executives, some of the expenses that were submitted for reimbursement by county taxpayers. Yeah, that's something that needs a lot more investigation into it. I'm sure we have county policies, because I know in my day job, we have policies on what you can and cannot spend, right, and what you can and cannot spend things on. But the bigger question is how did all this get approved? Because usually before you do a business trip, at least that's what I'm used to, you have some level of estimate and what it's going to cost you, and then you get approval for
You
that.
have to submit into the state everything in
Yeah.
advance for
Right.
approval.
You get approval, and so did that happen? It doesn't seem it happened, because Executive Coulter seemed to be surprised by some of these numbers that came out. And let's say he didn't pre-approve it, but normally you would get a monthly report at the end of the month. So this is what's spent by employee A, this was spent by employee B, right? What are the numbers? And you can at least look at it, okay, this doesn't make sense. So does that beg the question that doesn't happen? Or does that beg the question it does happen, but somebody doesn't look at it? Or does that beg the question everybody's spending too much money?
However you slice and dice it, it's a very corrupting system. I know when I was on the county commission, we had to submit, anything in advance before you go. You don't just decide on your own and then submit a reimbursement and decide, oh, well, I've went, and so you must pay. No, you must get approval first. And I watched with the contracting, I put in a resolution that turned into a study group to decide whether they're going to change a vendor. And so I watched the whole purchasing process, and it was airtight. Nobody could put a thumb on the scale except a department head, like, the prosecutor, the sheriff, the clerk or something, that said, we've used a company for, 10, 15 years. They're within 5% of this other company. We would prefer this because we don't want to take a chance. That'd be the only kind of thumb that could be put on the scale. Other than that, everybody was kept out of this process. And it just seems like so many of these provisions that used to be in place have been changed, allowing corruption to just go spelling out into the, when I looked at the expenditures of Sean Carlson, it was just like mind-blowing. It looked like he was just wherever he wanted to go, whenever he wanted to go, and then justify it down the road. All of that should be pre-approved, exactly where are you going, what are you doing, how does this benefit the county, and not just, this wild west on taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. Should the deputy county executive have a little bit of leeway because things pop up? Sure, right? Or is his numbers a little higher because of that? Sure. There should still be some kind of structure, some type of procedure or policy behind that controls what anybody in the county does, including
Absolutely.
the county executive.
Anybody can say, like the governor saying, well, I'm traveling with this monstrous, ginormous entourage because we're going to, do this business stuff. If you go somewhere, you're there for a week and you have one meeting, well, you justified it because you had the one meeting, whether it develops something or not. These things have to really have a lot of oversight, a lot of media oversight, a lot of oversight from whatever regulatory bodies are there. And it just seems like, certainly in Oakland County, that was not done.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. In the past, we're starting to see a lot more media coverage than we've seen historically, which is good to see because there's been other things that happened over the years that you would bring up and it would just go on deaf ears. It would go out there and just you couldn't get anybody to bite, no matter what it was. It's like, well, somebody needs to investigate that. We can investigate and put out the report, but if nobody else learns about it, what do we learn? What does the public learn? They go to the polls and elect, even though, okay, did you see what this X person did or this person did? Because it's not out there in the press. You can't find anything about it.
That's right. Yeah, I've seen that as long as I've been there. The partisanship among the media. Republican Party would do something, Democrat would party do something, the different treatment. I've seen that as long as I've been here in office, all the way back to the county commission.
Yeah, it's getting much better from what I've seen it in the past. We're starting.
I would say recently
I've
noticed that too.
Starting to get a lot more traction on some of these topics that should be investigated and at least reported. Right?
They were saying the media's approval or trust rating was 14%. So maybe that finally, they're losing readership across the board to podcasters and, social media. And I think they're finally, sounds like, realizing, listen, we've got to start reporting the truth, reporting interesting, good, informative stories, regardless where that lands. So I think I've noticed it getting a little better too.
Yeah, I have to.
So what else have you seen there in the county?
One of the other things is road commission. You brought up roads earlier. There's been a talk about bringing the road commission under the county leadership. Some people support it, some people do not. There was a study done, and I was part of that group, and to do a review, and we have yet to put out a report. You probably read in the press we had an issue with one of our road commissioners, got a little bit aggressive with one of the employees. He was actually a deputy sheriff also, reservist I believe it was. So the road commissioner of the county didn't discipline at all. The sheriff's department did, based on his action, because he still does represent them even when he's not on duty, right? So, and that was a disappointing thing is that, nobody really wanted to talk about that, and there were some discussions about it. It's still an ongoing debate, which knowing the playbook of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that if someone's going to pop up at the 12th hour and be put on an agenda that day, that nobody gets to debate it, because that's also some of the tactics that my colleagues use a lot. This doesn't happen in all cases, but some of the hot button topics that come up, that's how they handle it. They push it through. One of them, what you talked about, fiscal responsibility, one of the items that came up, was it 2 years ago? On the December meeting before end of a term, all of a sudden you see on the agenda the salaries for county commissioners. They voted in a raise of 20% for all the board of commissioners. All the Republicans voted no, and all the Democrats voted yes.
I think I might have saw a tiny bit of coverage about this. And that's something for the people to know. Are they getting a 20% increase in pay out there?
No, this was at the peak of the, I'm not going to call it a recession, but, you had the inflation at its high numbers in the 20s where, foods was going through the roof. And everybody was trying to adjust based on that. So they felt it was the right thing to do for the commissioners.
But the average person wasn't getting a 20% raise. Even though it was not the biggest complaint. We were having exploding inflation, but the salaries weren't keeping pace with that. What else would you say is important for the people of Oakland County to know about your job and the county commission?
I think it's important to know the makeup of the board. There's 19 commissioners today. I think when you served, there was 21. So we moved down to 19, and there's 11 Democrats, 7 Republicans. So, we can kick and scream and yell and jump up and down on tables, but if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. And you understand what it's like to be in a minority.
I do.
You don't get a lot of things passed. But I'll give a little bit of credit to some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Some of them, will at least, like during committees, will at least allow you to put a topic on the agenda and have a discussion. Is it a hot button topic? No, but it's a topic that might be important to you and for your community to bring up on the agenda. So
When I was on the county commission, I got a lot of complaints about leadership because the entire time I put every single resolution that the Democrats put forward in my committees up for a vote. Every single one. And they were saying, well, Jim, this is not really how we do things. I said, if it's a good resolution, which is like a bill, if it's a good resolution, then it passes, and it should. And if it's a bad one, it won't pass. And almost all of them were bad ones, and they didn't pass. And there was a few good ones. I wasn't going to, I know on both sides of the aisle, they'll pull a bill or resolution, assign it to somebody from their side of the aisle. I never did that. So if it was a resolution the Democrat put forward and it was a good one, we heard it, we passed it out of the committee. I have never had a single hearing on a single thing I've ever put in. Never, since the Democrats have been there. And the gavel comes crashing down on any questions where there's a controversial issue. So the disparity and what they would say, what the public would hear out there, well, this cuts both ways. No, it doesn't. It's not how I operated the committees. They're operating like a tyranny, like an absolute dictatorship, to smash through with very little discussion, very important legislation that will impact the people of the state of Michigan. It's always frustrating when that's done. I never did it.
I'm glad to hear that. And I knew that because we served together for a few years now.
We did.
And what I find entertaining, I don't know if you see this at the state though, we'll sit and have long debates on ideas that cost a few hundred to a few $1,000s, right? You see a resolution come up for a couple million, nobody really talks about it, goes right through. I was like, you're talking millions of dollars, not
Yes.
thousands of dollars.
So one of the things that's got to be done in Oakland County is they've got to get control of the money, the expenditures, the new taxes that are coming out. I'm glad the media are finally putting that out there, letting people know what's going on, because we really have to watch the budgets. So much of what we're dealing with is going to be taxpayer dollars in terms of property tax. So with that, I really appreciate having this opportunity to talk to Commissioner Spisz, and we will talk with him again about things that you need to know about Oakland County.
Thank you.